Hi guys, welcome to another episode of In the Know. Today we're joined by Alexis Powell-Howard from Fortis Therapy. Welcome to the studio, Alexis.
Thank you, thanks for having me.
Do you want to tell us first and foremost and the viewers a little bit about Fortis Therapy and kind of your story and how that came about?
Yeah, so Fortis is 10 years old this year, so we just celebrated with a really nice party.
Oh, congratulations.
Getting to 10 years. And the reason it kind of came about was I was working in the NHS in what's classed as Tier 3 mental health service, so working with complex psychological difficulties. And the writing was on the wall really for restructure, and it was changing in terms of the provision, and I'd kind of got to a point where I thought I can't do it this way anymore, in terms of trying to fit in. I loved the job and I loved the work, but the actual cultural system and everything I was in just didn't fit for the way I felt that it should work. So a few months before they were going through the restructure, I set up what was called Mentis at the time, which is Latin for mind, and gradually started to, with a business partner, build up, client work and mediations and trainings and all sorts of things. So by the time the restructure was happening and the redundancies came up, I could go, because I was literally at the point of really need to let me go now because I've got enough work on and need to jump. So I managed to get some redundancy money. So I knew I'd got 6 months to make it work, and went from there really. But I guess the reason I went into doing the whole mental health training and therapy side of it in the first place was due to my own experiences of when I was about 19. Had quite a severe car accident and was diagnosed with PTSD, and there weren't really any services that I could access that were of a good standard. I did have support, but both of those ended quite badly. One with the guy making inappropriate advances, and the second one with someone falling asleep. So, eventually, quite a few years later, I thought, I'm going to go and see what this is supposed to be all about. It wasn't my intention to do this and what I'm doing now, but just loved it, and thought, well, if I can do it well and, the quality's there and the ethics are there and everything else, then that's what I'm going to do. And that's where it kind of came from, really. I just started training and kept going.
So the initial jump with Fortis, you say you already had you were quite busy with working with your own clients. And
yeah, I always had a private practice. So I'd converted my garage at home, so I could see clients in the evenings and weekends and things like that. And so I was kind of doing that in the day for the NHS, then doing that in the evening, and really started to speak to places like schools and police forces and businesses and colleges, and saying, what services do you need to help with people? Not HR services, but when people are in that more complex needs, dynamics being difficult or whatever, and just started to get those contacts, building that network up and putting the hours in.
What was the initial response when you reached out to these organisations? Was it apparent that there was instantly that there was a need for it? Did the conversation flow quite naturally?
Yeah, initially it was when you're sending all those emails, I don't know if you had the same thing, but when you send loads of emails out to people, like you've got your own email address and your own business name, and no one's responding, you're like, please email me back, anything. But what I did was I went to the people that I'd already done work for in the past. There was a lady at Grimsby College, for example, that I'd been a lecturer and a head of programs there, so I got in touch with her and said, if there's anything you need help with, and she was like, actually, can you speak to our HR team, because there are some people we could do with supporting, and gradually those relationships I'd already really built up over the years started to come into their own. And then I was in a meeting, like a child protection meeting for a family that I was working with at the time. And one of the schools in the room said, I hear you're all going through a restructure. And I said, yeah, we are. And they said, isn't there anything you can do that we can just buy in? Because we can't access, the services just aren't there when we need them. And I literally got my business cards that morning in my bag. Yeah. And I was like, funnily enough, here you
Yeah.
go. And it just really rolled. You know, once the ball's rolling,
Yeah.
and then we had some work we could talk about. Then we had some feedback and testimonials and things like that, and then it starts to build up.
Yeah. So when you kind of went full time with the business initially, was it? I guess it was a steep learning curve in terms of like the business side of things, or did that come quite naturally? Or?
Some things I learnt the hard way. I'd worked in my family business growing up, so which was it wasn't a mental health business, it was a fish and chip shop.
And fish and chips. Everyone was fish and chips.
Yeah, exactly. And a tea shop as well, and we had a catering engineering company. So I'd grown up from about the age of, I'd say probably 10 or 11, working in the family business and gradually building up, learning. And a lot of things that I'd learned that made sense to me, I didn't really know what that was. So like inducting staff, for example, that made sense to me, and I did it automatically without knowing what that was. And then at the same time, I'd gone to night school to do business and finance. So some things I'd got quite a good handle on. And I think I love the freedom of being able to try stuff out and see how it goes. Other things I didn't know anything about. So, you know, I had a working knowledge of accounts, but didn't know enough about anything really. You know, I knew we needed a website, which I wrote the content for, and I got my brother to help me to put it out there. And you wanted a logo, and, you know, he's creative. It's like, can you draw me a tree?
Yeah.
You know, and so I pulled on who I'd got around me, because I think that's really important. I can't be the jack of all trades, you know, I just don't know enough. So there were things that were gaps, even things further down the line. So the reason we changed the business name was because there was an IP, intellectual property, problem with the name that we'd chosen. So we changed it to Fortis, and that cost a lot of money to come to that realisation, then change it, then own the name. So, you know, you don't know what you don't know is the reality. And you sometimes don't find out until you think, oh.
No, I think that it's kind of a common theme that, you know, we speak to a lot of entrepreneurs and stuff, and even our own experience, that I think there's always reasons why not to do things or why you can't do things, but ultimately you just have to start sometimes, and then those things you just kind of figure out, don't you, as you go.
Yeah, you do. And there's lots of people out there, isn't there, to ask?
Yeah, there's always, you know, we've been fortunate to have a network of people that you can, you know, draw on. I think that's invaluable, kind of, especially when you start off because I suppose the nature of reaching out to people, you kind of start to build a relationship with them, and then it kind of goes on like that.
Yeah, it does. Relationship, and we know that, don't we, from business networking perspective. That's what people are looking to do, and I think that's building meaningful relationships in business is really important, because, you know, there's a lot of people you can be connected to, and, you know, LinkedIn is a prime example of that you can be linked with people but not necessarily have relationships with them that are actually any use. I love having that tribe of people that I just kind of go, don't know, let me just ring someone, ask a question.
Yeah.
If someone who knows more than me. And I think that's one of the key things about setting up a business, running a business, developing a business, because it never stops, does it? It's always evolving and changing if you're doing it well, I think. Yeah.
So speaking of that, like, how was so from when you set up, you know, Fortis and our mentors then Fortis, how has it developed to where it is now? What kind of?
It's just grown and grown, which is fantastic. But for me, I think it's being almost a bit preemptive of some of the things that are going on, you know. So some of our services have massively developed from, you know, we started off with one office in the Business Hive in Grimsby, and we built up to 3, and then we moved into a premises in Grimsby with 7 rooms, and then we opened in Scunthorpe and Hull and Louth, and and then we, you know, everything's then gone online as a result of COVID, and so we've gone from being people who did therapy to people who also do, you know, mediation and a lot of therapeutic coaching, and we coach a lot of leaders, and we do a lot of culture work in organisations. Wellbeing's massive. I don't think you can ever have your eggs all in one basket. And at one point we had a lot of work in schools and in education, for example. So we were getting known for that. But I realised that all it would take would be a different decision around funding, or the government would bring something in and we would be screwed. And my main thing is helping people, help as many as we can. And we're always trying to be creative and innovative about how we do that, whether that's a community group or, trying to find ways of being able to offer lower cost therapy for people and, just try and figure it out. And so it's grown from being me and had a business partner, and that ended probably 5 or 6 years ago now. And then went for it on my own. But I have a really good team, that's developed over that time as well, and that makes all the difference.
Yeah, I was just going to ask about how the services have developed, really, in terms of, I'm familiar with some of the organisations that you support and that kind of thing, but I suppose, just how that's developed from when you started off to what you offer now.
Yeah, so originally it was very much either contracts in education or it was private referrals. And what we've developed over the years is being able to set up those kind of service level agreements with businesses. So, recently we've got a contract with the RHS, which is incredible, and would never have thought that would have been something we would have, managed to achieve. And then other businesses around the area, some of the, larger businesses, so who really want to support their teams. So whereas it would have been very kind of traditional therapeutic approach, I guess, now we are able to offer a service where they can ring us and say, this person needs support, or that person within their business can ring us and say, I need some support, I work for X, so can we, can I access the service? We advertise it within the businesses. We feed back very minimal amount, but usually around any themes that we're seeing, but we would always get the permission of people that we're working with to do that. We also go in and do the training, so if you've got managers and leaders who aren't sure about how to support someone who's struggling with mental health, or even recognise the signs and symptoms, really what we potentially see is quite basic stuff, but actually really de-skills people. People really want to do the right thing, generally speaking, but don't want to do the wrong thing, so we'll avoid having that conversation. And then working with, organisations like the adoption support services. So, from it being in that individual work, we now do kind of couple work and families. We do work between, partners, and we really can try to assess what's needed to make sure that whatever we do is right for whatever that situation is, rather than it being, they need to fit on the pathway or a particular way of working because that's what we offer. If we're not the right service, we'll say that, but if we can find a way of being able to support them, we will.
Yeah, that was where I was going with it, really, to understand if it's driven, I guess it is driven from trends of, what people really need. And I think that's great that you're basing it around their needs rather than, because I think some sectors, people sometimes have to fit into boxes a little bit.
It's really, and I think that's what I found when I was a client, if you've got X problem, you have this. Well, that might not be right. And there really isn't a magic pill that's going to, in any way, shape or form, whether that's medication or therapy, that's going to fix everybody. Because if it did, well, I'd be a very rich woman for a start. And it would be very simple. And it just isn't. So we have to be adaptable. And that's one of my biggest frustrations, I think, with statutory services is they are swamped, and I completely get that. I've worked in them. And I understand that it has to be system driven in order to be able to provide a level of service, but there's an awful lot of people who don't access any service or can't access any service that actually would just really benefit from support. And I'm not talking about, people who aren't particularly unwell, say it's low mood or something like that. There's always a reason. Those are just symptoms of something. So for me, it's understanding, okay, so what's underneath that and how can we help you? And we've definitely seen an increase in complexity, in terms of what people are holding. And, a lot of people were left with their own headspace for a while there, in lockdowns and things, and not much to distract or avoid, to help avoidance. So those things come to the surface. They do. they bite you on the arse when you least expect it. That's what it does. That's what mental health does.
So in terms of, would you be comfortable talking about maybe the shift in some of the kind of big sort of themes that you see people struggling with in recent years?
Yeah, I think there's been, the way I kept seeing it, I suppose over the last 3 years particularly, there's always been themes, but they've always taken a bit of time to come through. Whereas in the last 3 years, it's felt like there's almost been one way, like almost a bit like a tsunami wave, and then another tsunami wave. You're like, oh, okay, this is what's happening. Oh, right, okay, this is where people are at now. And I know when at the beginning of COVID, I was on the radio a lot, and I was being interviewed and podcasts and things, and a lot of the themes that we were seeing were people just feeling completely lost. And there was a real sense of loss, like identity, people losing their jobs. They didn't know how to function as a family or as a couple because we're very busy all the time and could avoid that, or an increase in domestic abuse because no one could escape the house. And we saw an increase in self-harm. Young people particularly were struggling with things like body dysmorphia because they were on screens a lot. We're not used to communicating and seeing ourselves in that communication. And suddenly you're right there. And they were struggling with that in school. We've seen problems with eating and really high anxiety levels as well. And I think in businesses, particularly trying to support people from a distance. So even though now there's a lots of choices that have been made through things like flexi working, hybrid working, that kind of thing, how are you checking in with people to make sure they're okay? It's getting more difficult to get people to come in even for meetings and things in some businesses. What's that about? And how do you do that without it becoming authoritarian and dictating what people should and shouldn't be doing? Do you know what I mean? It's a difficult balance to strike. So there's definitely been those themes. And I mean, currently what we're seeing is real difficulties for children in early years. They've probably for the last, if they're just starting school or they're in that kind of preschool bit, they've probably not been doing the socialising that we would have expected that we would normally do. So, all those groups weren't on and all those kinds of things that they go along to. And so we're seeing a difference in development, in social skills, in the ability to learn. And that creates issues for then schools to try and innovate, which they do. I mean, they're incredible how they try and still meet the needs of what a good education looks like, for example, through the government side into what's actually the reality of what's going on in their classrooms. And then you've got young people who, I think, the whole going off to uni thing, which a lot of them are still doing, but what we're seeing is that some of them are choosing to stay local and, be home, and all the financial issues and everything else as well. So there's an awful lot of different stresses. And I think, and I know it's not a nice thing to talk about, but, we know that the suicide rates are going up. And I was only thinking on the way here, we've heard and been connected to people that we've known who've taken their own lives. And I think I do feel that quite personally, because I think we're not doing enough. And therapy isn't the answer to sorting out all of those different things. We have to get the system right. And therapy is there to help those people who need support, absolutely. But it can't therapize out of where we are, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess it's, the people struggling, it's their the foundation of their lives, maybe the situation they're in.
Yeah, and trying to enable people to look after themselves and take time and all that self-care stuff. I'm banging on about it all the time. People just get bored, like, oh my God, here she goes again. But it has to be part of what we consider. We're very good at working and doing what we should do or what we feel we should be doing, but there's an awful lot. Life's not just about that.
Obviously, it's an ever-changing thing. How do you actually try and anticipate or stay on top of changing the world, changing issues in society or trends? Or
we try and have lots of different ways of approaching people. The fundamental basic of all of that is affecting people, and what works in one area will probably work in another as well, because we're all human beings at the end of the day. So we try and flex what we're doing. So it might be we've got community groups where we try and share information. So we've got the Westerly Club for men's mental health, and we've got the F Word, which is where we just kind of every day we just share something that's just validating or something to think about. We try and do blog posts on a regular basis of different topics which are really important and that we're seeing in the media and we're seeing in terms of trends in the client work we do. But then it's how we offer our services and we feed back as a team. So we have things called peer support groups. So every month, everybody is in a peer support group who's one of our therapists and one of our team, and we all share, not the detail obviously, but we share the themes that we're seeing. So that then feeds into then what we then offer, and our training, it gets developed. So we've done lots of work with police officers over the years. From those therapy sessions, we then collaborated with Pete Thorpe, who's a superintendent now, but he was a detective chief inspector at the time, and we're collaborating with him again. And we looked at what are the themes that come out of therapy, what is he seeing in terms of the teams he manages, what's potentially on the horizon, how can we make sure training is absolutely fit for purpose, how do we feed back any themes from back that into the senior leadership team. So it's not like we go in and we do something, we come out. I just think, well, it's a waste of time. You need to do something which actually has an impact. So we're constantly reviewing and thinking about how can we share information and knowledge. Not that we've got all the answers, because we don't, but we're just trying to preempt really what we see all the time.
I know it's probably hard to kind of condense down, but is there, going back to what you were saying earlier about ways that that you maybe convey to people that they can help themselves, especially with, I suppose, like you kind of touched on the work-life balance, and is there any kind of key self-care tips that you could maybe share?
Yeah, I think self-care is a really individual thing. If you look at a medical model, we'd be looking at it from, are you taking your meds? If you take meds when you should, and do you go and see the pharmacist when you've got something wrong with you, or do you go and see the GP? That's on a medical model, that's what self-care is. But when you're looking at it from a mental health and a wellbeing perspective, we taking action to have experiences and to put things in our daily lives that really help us to lift our mood is really important. And you've got to track yourself, so if I always talk about, scaling, we do it a lot in mental health. So if 10's the best you've ever felt and 1's the worst you've ever felt, where are you on that spectrum right now? And that isn't just about your mental well-being, that's physically, and it might be about feeling that you've got a purpose. It could be to do with relationships, fitness, nutrition, all, hydration, all of it, which is hard to pick one number, but you've got to start somewhere. So you find that number and think, right, well, how am I going to improve that by 1? What am I going to do in order to improve that number by 1? And that is a really helpful way of just breaking it down into something that feels a bit more manageable. So if you're a 5, what's a 6 look like? It doesn't have to be, oh God, I'm a 5, I need to be a 9, how am I going to get there? It's what's that incremental step? So that could be anything from getting your sleep routine right, to what you're eating, to your exercise, to movement just in general. But it's also that social connectedness, and I think that's one of the things we lost a bit of. We told a lot of, social distancing, but actually it was physical distancing. The social stuff we still need. Having things in the diary to look forward to, spending time with people who actually give you a boost, not people who bring you down. Drains, we don't want drains, we want people who, are more radiators, who you feel better and warmer with. So it's on all sorts of different levels. But if we don't take care of our mental health, we don't take care of our own selves, no one can do that for us. And a lot of therapy is helping people to recognise that they have a right to look after themselves. They've got a right to say no to things, the right to make mistakes, all these things that we beat ourselves up about all the time. And once our mood starts to go, if we don't put something in to help to lift it, even if it's a physical lift, we get some nice endorphins going or something like that, then we keep slipping.
Yeah. It's interesting what you said about like saying no to things, because I think there's ever increasing pressure, isn't there, on people from, work and kind of how they appear on to other people online, or
Without
that's
doubt.
always been around, I guess, the keeping up with the Joneses maybe, or what, that type of thing. But I think with social media and everything, there's definitely people that feel like they're always competing and gotta look a certain way.
Yeah, it used to be neighbours, just keep up with the neighbours. Like,
yeah, now it's the whole world.
yeah,
like,
it is, and it's accessible, isn't it? It's like, oh, I'm doing really badly today. Everyone else is doing amazing, and that is one of the things. I think boundaries is one of the key things around mental health, and it is about saying no, but also protecting yourself. So how much we're looking at things online, how much news we're taking on board. I've switched all my notifications off because actually, generally speaking, on a day-to-day basis, does that stuff actually affect me? Probably not. Cost of living obviously does. But all those other things that the media tell us is really important actually isn't that important to us on a daily basis. If we take control of what we've got and who's around us, that's what we've actually got control over. So the boundary part is, how are we looking after ourselves? How are we saying no to things? If we're saying yes and then we immediately resent it, we're not saying yes to the right things.
Yeah.
We're saying yes because we're trying to people please, or we're trying to, not let somebody else down, or whatever that might be. But we might let ourselves down in the process. So, we need to reflect on that really, because our boundaries are all over the shop. We can access things 24/7. We can be accessed 24/7. And often we are quite conditioned to, do the right thing, but, be who people want us to be. And one of the biggest things I talk a lot about with clients is about their own identity and who are they really, what's that about, and how would it be if you're not who they expect you to be, but who you think you are or want to be. And that can be quite challenging because people don't like it. People don't like change. People have expectations of us that they don't like if we don't meet them, all of that kind of stuff. So it's hard to make changes because actually it's easier not to, if that makes sense.
I think it's difficult as well, it's one thing I've struggled with personally, like since setting up a business, is like those boundaries with kind of, you feel like you always have to be on almost because, things happen at, all hours, or your brain's always thinking about how can I improve this? Oh, so-and-so's just, done that. How could we maybe, there's all these things constantly thinking about the well-being of the business and what needs to be done, either on a day-to-day or, so it is difficult to, I think I've got a bit better at that, just kind of putting my phone to one side. But in the weekend or in the evening.
It's making conscious choices. I mean, we do a lot of work with business owners and a lot of coaching, a lot of, after COVID, a lot of therapeutic support, just people getting in touch with me and who I know, through the business world, and going, I just need to talk to somebody. Can you match me with someone? And because they were all over the shop. Boundaries just went out the window because we were surviving. You had to get done. We had to get done. And I think we all felt quite a collective trauma from that. Are we going to lose everything we've built up? And there's such a lot we couldn't do to try and save it, if you like. We had to fit in with what was available. Now, and I think one of the things about being entrepreneurial is that's part of our qualities, if you like, is that our brains are constantly ticking over. Could do that differently. Could I'll speak to so and so. We could, we need to write that bit down, or we need to talk to them and see if we can collaborate. And there's all those things going on constantly. But some of it is that's a great thing. It's a really good thing, but it's how you manage it. Do you make a note of it somewhere and come back to it when you can, or because for me, I have millions of ideas. My team, I've learned over the years, I don't tell them all of them because they'll just go, oh God, here we go. Because it's not good. Because what's the ticker tape that's going through here, I have to manage it. It's not fair for me to then pass that on into my business and everyone be like, oh, we're doing this today, we're doing this then, or we're doing what she said yesterday. Because you've got to model it for other people.
People are struggling. It's like everybody, kind of went into almost survival mode.
Definitely.
After kind of COVID, the lockdown, everything else, and then kind of things are looking better. And then I know personally a lot of businesses again are kind of worried about cost of living and kind of how to.
It does feel a bit like we've come out the just starting to see some kind of settlement after COVID, and there's a whole other set of challenges on the way, and it's just
and it's how much capacity you've got for them, isn't it? Because I think I don't know about you guys, but I got to the point where I was like, oh, I am tired, you know, burnout, and you know, did everything that I possibly could, and my part of it was because I knew I got people relying on me. Secondly, I've got three children, married, and you know, I've got mortgage to pay, and you know, all the stuff that everybody else has to worry about. And I think one of my biggest worries was, what if what I think is important, as in mental health and therapy, what if other people don't think that's important anymore? That's what my fear came down to. And you know, if we can't survive, what then? What does that mean? Because then we've all got a trajectory in our heads of where we're heading, and unless you're ready to sell your business or come out of it in some way or another, we're on that trajectory of running it, aren't we? And then suddenly you're on a surreal roller coaster ride of what's going on.
But I guess so for you guys, I guess, did it after that initial concern of, you know, people not seeing it as important or whatever, I'm guessing that quickly shifted, did it, the other way?
It was literally, we moved all the services online within 48 hours. We'd written handbooks and done training with everybody about how to do this, and then we went for it, and we basically carried on seeing people in person who, you know, we assessed a risk between suicidal ideation and risk from a mental health perspective to COVID risk, and we decided that we would keep that minimal, but there were certain people we just couldn't leave. So we continued some of that, and we also then moved everything else online or on the telephone, or we did FaceTime, we did people out on walks, whatever we could do.
Yeah. How did you find that, kind of taking services online?
It was a bit of hold on tight, you know, which it always is, isn't it, when you're doing something different. And what was fantastic was the team came up with like loads of creative, innovative ways of being able to do some of the stuff we would do in a therapy room online. So, you know, someone had found an online, with younger children, we sometimes use sand trays, and they'd found an online sand tray in a doll's house, and we'd got whiteboards. And as the technology was starting to kind of move with some of this stuff as well, we could move with it. So it worked really well. And actually for the business, it's been massively beneficial because we're all over the UK now.
Yeah.
You know, whereas pre-COVID, if I'd said to my therapist, right, we're going to offer an online service, they'd have been like, well, it's not the same, it doesn't work the same. And I would have probably agreed, although I'd got some online clients at that point. It wasn't massive. And now we can do it anywhere.
Yes, sometimes the circumstances, like those challenges, work out.
There's a benefit.
You really, where you have to dive in through because it's the only option.
Yeah.
But it does remove all those barriers. It's like going back to what I was saying about when you set up a business, it's difficult. Obviously, there's varying, you know, depending on what position you're in at that point in your life or whatever, you know, it is very difficult. But I think there is something to be said for just kind of jumping into that pressure and just sort of, it's like that old saying where you jump off a cliff and build a plane on the way.
Do you know what? It was
which is probably overused, but
no. Well, when I first went to see Mark Webb at the Hive, you know, and I was in the NHS, and I was like, I don't know if this has got legs. Should it be a company? Should it be a social a community interest company? Should it be a social enterprise? And I was like, well, you know, what about there's no guarantees? And I remember he said you know, you don't see the net until you've jumped. And I was like, that's really helpful. Thanks so much. But he was absolutely right, because actually you don't have the space for the net until you've jumped. You know, if you're safe and you're in a job that pays you a salary every month, and you know it's coming, and you know you get your holidays and you get your annual, you know, your leave and everything, your sickness pay if you've got that deal or whatever, that's a very, very comfortable place to be, even if you're not happy in the job, because there's security there. So jumping out of that, my husband thought I was crazy. Yeah, he was like, well, why would you leave a perfectly good job? And I was like, because I'm unhappy and I want to do it better and differently. And so it was quite a tough time in that I'm just going to go and give it a go. And my dad was the one who said, who'd run his own business when I was younger, just said, you know, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You go and do something else.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
He came up with it. Well, he posted another one the other day, Matt Webb as well, on LinkedIn about, you've probably heard it, what was it? Ships are safe in port, but they're not built. They're not meant to be in port. Yeah, so.
And I think it tests your mettle, doesn't it? When things are going against, when you're kind of up against it. I remember thinking, or times when I've thought, oh my God, I don't know, my business partner going and change of name and COVID and, things that become stressful, and thinking, well, I've either got it or I haven't, and this is going to be testing whether I can get through it or not. And actually at those times I flip into being less emotional about it and more strategic.
Yeah.
And that's when I know, right, okay, I've got this, because I've figured it out. It's when I'm feeling aggrieved and upset and it's unfair and all of that kind of stuff that I think, come on, have a word with yourself. Let's sort this out and get a plan in place, and then off we go. Yeah,
it's hard to, sometimes those challenges strip away that, because I find I go back and forth with, like you say, emotion comes into play.
Yeah.
I'm quite bad for procrastinating sometimes, because I like to think about things quite a long time sometimes before but I've learned to get a bit more, make quicker decisions. And
it depends on why you procrastinate. If procrastination is because it might not work, or I might get it wrong, or I need to thought of every angle, then you never know every angle. And I think that's the bit where you just have to go for it.
Yeah.
That's one of the bits I love about running a business, is we're just like, well, let's give it a go and let's see if it works. And if it doesn't, we've tried it, or we'll tweak it and we'll pilot something. And that's the only way to do it, really.
I think mine's because I'm too idealistic sometimes. So if I think, say we're going to offer, like, it could be anything, like starting this podcast or building a new website or anything. I always, almost in my head, I'm like, right, well, the foundation needs to be this before we even start. But I've realised that I need to do away with that and just be like, right, let's just start and we'll just figure that out. And that's something I've got better at.
Yeah. And that's out of need, isn't it? It needs must.
It's kind of, it goes by what you said earlier. Some of those skills are useful though, because I'd say, like, I'm definitely a perfectionist. So sometimes seeing the details helpful, but sometimes it's a hindrance.
But I think that's about who you've, like, for the two of you, you'll have different ways of approaching those things, and that probably complements what you achieve.
I'm just like dive straight into it.
I was going to say you're the opposite.
Yeah. But it does work out well. We do.
You've got the bases covered, and I think that, I mean, my leadership team, we know what our strengths are, and I will wing it. I will wing stuff. I do a lot of professional speaking. I'll still be finishing tweak. If I've been really busy, I'll still be tweaking stuff before I go in, like in the car park and stuff. Nobody knows that, but I rock up and I'm like, I've got this. And it's only because I've done it for years, If I said to one of my team, can you go and just rock up and deliver that and finish it off half an hour before you present it? They'd be like, no, that's not happening. But they will see the detail in some of the things that I need them to see the detail in, because I'm not seeing that. And I know perfect doesn't exist, and I see people striving for that a lot in mental health, with themselves as people. So actually letting go of that's quite a nice thing, and just going, well, it'll be good enough, and that's the best way of approaching it, I think.
Yeah. So who's kind of inspired you, would you say, on your journey?
So in terms of people who inspire me, I think it comes from different angles, and so there's my family that I grew up with, in the family business, and I learned a lot from them about, what works and what doesn't work, and how to run a family business, if you like, what everyone's included in it. And then in terms of my family I have now, my children, who are all teenagers currently, and I love being around them, and they challenge me every day, and but I learn a lot from them as well. So, and they learn from me. So that's great in terms of inspiration, for thinking about the pressures they're under, and what's going on for them, and what's brilliant as well, because they've got some fantastic ideas and they're really funny. All three of them are very bright and funny people. So I love spending time with them. And, you know, I suppose it's inspiration / support, but my husband, who's been in the background a lot of the time, we've started to come more into Fortis now. But he's been the person who's kind of been like, you know, I always think of it a bit like a boxing match, you know, kind of my corner man. So I go out like a bit beaten up, and he kind of gives me a pep talk and pushes me back in the ring. It's that kind of thing. Because it's hard, it's tough, isn't it, running a business and trying to be on top of everything. And it is personal, you know, business is personal because it's everything I believe in is in this business. So having that support and him, you know, and even when I did my first, I'd done 2 TEDx talks, and the first one was in 2018, and I couldn't think of how I was going to approach it. And he'd bought me a piece of pottery, kintsugi pottery, which is Japanese, and it's made put back together with gold. So it's really...
we did a kintsugi shoot.
Yeah.
A while back.
I mean,
it's a cool concept.
I suppose it might be worth explaining that for the concept.
Yeah, so the concept, but he bought it for me because it was almost representative of me, like been through quite a lot, and he'd written me this lovely card about, you know, being resilient and all these things that he sees in me that I probably at the time didn't feel and wasn't seeing. And that was really, it was fantastic because it meant that I could see what he was seeing. And then I took that idea to the TEDx talk, and I did it about, you know, about having a kintsugi, you know, piece of pottery. And if everybody had one that represented them, they would all be different. You know, they'd all have different cracks and chips, and they'd have different bits that were patching up, you know, bits of damage. And they would all completely represent everybody as a completely individual piece of pottery. And that's kind of really fits with my view of mental health, really, that we're all different, but we're all made up of things that have happened to us. And rather than it being a terrible thing, how can we make it into something that actually celebrates who we are? And because it does make us who we are, it does have a habit of defining us, whether we want it to or not.
Yeah.
So that was the idea behind it. So that was an inspiring idea that I hadn't had myself. I've taken full credit for it ever since in my TED talk, but he gave it to me at the beginning. So, you know, I've got fantastic parents, and I, from a business perspective, I follow different podcasts, and, you know, and I listen to different business leaders and listen to their ideas and things. And I think I was saying to you earlier that I'll be sat somewhere, I'll be on a train, or I'll pull over my car and think, I really need to think about that, and I'll tap it in my phone. And you know, it's just those ideas. You need that feed, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, I think I mean, for me, it's kind of surrounding, you know, with even down to like our business Instagram. I've followed loads of, you know, sort of brands and agencies and people that inspire me in terms of like the work that they do, or their brand, or, you know, the way they approach things and stuff. And I think that's the healthy side maybe of like social media, you know, like
definitely.
absorbing I try and just follow accounts that make me kind of feel positive, or
do you know, I was doing a talk the other day, and I was saying about make it the best magazine you've ever read. You know, like if it was the magazine you could pick off the shelf, what would be on it? So I have a work phone and I have a personal phone, and what I follow on my work phone is different to what I follow on my personal phone, because the personal stuff is just stuff that makes me laugh or gives me ideas, and or it might be about being perimenopausal, you know, things that are happening to me. And then on my other one, it's like accounts that inspire me from a business perspective, and, you know, other psychologists, psychotherapists, that kind of thing, seeing what people are doing, not to replicate it, but just sometimes it's useful to get a thought process going.
Yeah.
It's difficult if all the ideas are coming from you as an individual without anything.
So in terms of like your sort of personal career goals, like is there anything kind of built into your vision that you'd like to achieve, either in the near or the distant future?
It's an interesting one, actually, because I think I've only just really started to think about me as a kind of, not a separate entity to Fortis, but as in not just being Fortis, if you like. And I do a lot of speaking, and I want to do more of that. because it's something I really enjoy doing, and I love being able to speak to lots of people and get a message across that, you know, if I was just doing that on a one-to-one basis, would take me many years to get those messages across. So that works really well for me. I want to write a book as well. That's on my plan to do. And I've got 2 or 3 different ideas about what that might be. So I've been talking to some people about that recently. And then also things like I'm quite interested in property as well. So we've just been developing a new building for, well, not new, Georgian, but new to us, for Fortis. And it's taken us a while to get to the point we're at now. We've been looking for a building for years, actually, and looked around a lot. And the biggest problem we found is that most buildings are set up, well, older buildings. I quite like that kind of homely feel for the headquarters anyway. A lot of the other offices are different to that we've got. But I wanted it to be something that felt more homely. And we've looked at a lot of different buildings, but none of them have really fitted what we need it for. And we can't have rooms off rooms, you know, it's got to be separate spaces and confidential and all that kind of thing. So we bought a building on Dudley Street in Grimsby, which was my dentist up until about 5 years ago. Wow. It's a big old Georgian place. And we've taken it on, and we're doing it up basically, with everything that an old building brings, with all the surprises that we found under floorboards and all sorts of things that we've had to rebuild and things. But hopefully by middle of Jan it'll be near enough where we need it to be.
So how has that for your business then, in terms of capacity? And
yeah, it's improved the capacity. It's given us more therapy rooms. It'll give us a room where I've got a podcast, so we can do some podcast recording in it, hopefully. We can do a bit more social media content because it'll be set up for that. Whereas at the minute, it's, you know, what it's like. You have to try and find the right place with the right lighting, and, you know, my hair's got to be curly a little bit at least, things like that. So it'll give us more content for that. It's got a training room in it as well. It's got more office space. So the operations team's expanded already in readiness for that. And it's got a little courtyard area, so we'll be able to do some outside work as well. So it feels like it's you know, proper HQ really. Not that the one we're in now doesn't, but it's ours, and we can make it fit how we want it to look and feel really as you walk in.
So is your plan to kind of keep sort of expanding with demand, the kind of demands, or is